During Trump's first term, he and Modi built what many called a political bromance. Trump hosted Modi in Houston to a cheering stadium crowd. Modi returned the favor with a massive reception for Trump in Ahmedabad. The two leaders publicly praised each other, framed their partnership as historic, and set big goals like $500 billion in annual trade and deeper military cooperation. But fast forward to 2025, and that relationship is barely recognizable. Even before Modi's February visit to Washington, Trump had already begun warning of fresh tariffs. In response, Modi tried to ease the pressure. He preemptively announced a round of tariff cuts on nuts, energy products, and select US goods, hoping that goodwill would restore the warmth between them. When he landed in D.C., Modi kept the tone friendly, echoing his 2020 rhetoric and pushing for what he thought could be a trade reset. It didn't work. Trump was cold, transactional, and made new demands. Instead of relaunching the partnership, the White House doubled down, pressing India to open up its agriculture and dairy markets. Modi, trying not to escalate, agreed to offer additional concessions, but even that wasn't enough. Weeks later, Trump hit India with the Liberation Day tariffs, a new round of duties targeting Indian steel, auto parts, and chemicals. Modi's office didn't respond publicly, but Indian officials were reportedly stunned. After all the effort to prevent this exact scenario, India got hit anyway. Since then, both sides have continued negotiating, and for a while there was genuine optimism. US Vice President J.D. Vance even said in April that India could be one of the first countries to secure a deal under Trump's new trade regime, calling Modi a tough but serious negotiator. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick echoed that sentiment in early June, suggesting the two sides were making steady progress. Modi's trade minister, Piyush Goyal, publicly described the talks as fantastic and said India expected to receive special consideration given the concessions it had already offered. But by early July, that momentum faded. India refused to make further concessions on dairy and agriculture, and the US made it clear that partial compliance wouldn't be enough. Talks slowed, deadlines approached. And now, with the August 1st deadline looming, neither side has reached an agreement, and tensions are beginning to harden. For years, American officials have quietly voiced frustration about India's trade policies. But in 2025, it's no longer quiet. The US has made it clear the current state of economic relations isn't sustainable. Despite the public praise, India still imposes some of the highest tariffs in the world on US goods, particularly in agriculture, dairy, automobiles, and even consumer electronics. And beyond tariffs, US tech firms are finding it harder to operate in India. India's data localization rules, digital taxes, and e-commerce restrictions continue to undermine American business interests. From Washington's perspective, India's promises of market liberalization haven't translated into action. Even when Modi makes symbolic moves, like cutting tariffs on almonds or easing access for LNG, they're seen as tactical, not structural. The US didn't expect full economic integration overnight, but it did expect steady movement. What it sees now is resistance, and Trump's second term leaves far less room for diplomatic patience. This isn't 2020, when handshakes and grand speeches were enough. Trump and his trade team are focused on results. They want fast, measurable compliance, and they're willing to use tariffs to get it. In their view, if India can't meet US expectations, even after repeated gestures, it may not be worth giving special treatment at all. This is where the first signs of a falling out emerge. The US hasn't walked away from the relationship, but it's no longer willing to wait. So why doesn't India just give in? The answer is simple. It can't, at least not without political consequences. Modi's base includes powerful agricultural lobbies and millions of smallholder farmers who are extremely sensitive to foreign competition. Opening India's dairy sector to US imports isn't just an economic issue, it's political suicide. Even small moves can trigger massive backlash, as seen in past protests over agricultural reform. Modi already made early concessions this year, cutting tariffs on nuts, offering cleaner access to US LNG, and promising further openings in defense and digital sectors. But those gestures were calculated to avoid domestic blowback. Going further, especially on dairy or grain imports, would make him look weak. And ahead of critical state elections in late 2025, that's a risk Modi isn't willing to take. This puts India in a tight spot. It wants access to the US market, wants investment and high-tech cooperation, and doesn't want to be hit with new tariffs. But it also doesn't want to appear as though it's caving to American pressure. It's a careful balancing act, and it's part of why real alignment keeps slipping out of reach. But it wasn't always like this. For a few weeks, it seemed like a breakthrough was possible. In April, Vice President J.D. Vance traveled to India and publicly praised Modi, calling him a tough but serious negotiator. Vance said India could be the first country to reach a deal under Trump's new trade regime, sending a clear signal that Washington was ready to work with New Delhi. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick followed up in early June, saying the talks were moving in the right direction. Even Piyush Goyal, India's commerce minister, called the discussions fantastic and said India expected to be treated as a priority. But the optimism didn't last. By July, it became clear that the US wanted deeper structural changes, especially on agriculture and data flows. India resisted. Washington viewed India's offers as superficial. India saw the US demands as politically unrealistic. The distance between their positions grew, and suddenly, the enthusiasm faded. This wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was just the slow realization that the two sides were never fully aligned in the first place, and mistrust runs deep. Trade isn't the only area where the relationship is faltering. Underneath the economic tensions is a deeper issue: strategic mistrust. Over the past few years, India has deliberately avoided picking sides in global conflicts. It continued importing large volumes of Russian oil, despite US and European sanctions. It signed new military technology and defense logistics agreements with France and Iran. And it's remained non-committal on most US-led security initiatives, even those targeting China's influence in the Indo-Pacific. At the United Nations, India has abstained or softened its position on every major resolution pushed by Washington, whether on Gaza, Myanmar, or Xinjiang. And in forums like the Quad, India has blocked efforts to release joint statements directly criticizing Beijing. The pattern is clear. India is building a foreign policy based on strategic autonomy, not alignment. To many in Washington, this makes India unpredictable in a crisis. The US isn't just thinking about trade. It's thinking about what happens if Taiwan is blockaded, or if tensions with China escalate. The question being asked more frequently now is, would India show up, or step back? And right now, the answer isn't reassuring. This isn't an outright betrayal, but it's enough to cast doubt on the depth of the partnership. The falling out isn't dramatic. It's subtle. It's a quiet erosion of trust. The personal dynamic between Trump and Modi was once the foundation of the partnership. But in 2025, that dynamic is almost gone. There were no stadium rallies this time, no elaborate joint appearances. Modi's visit to Washington earlier this year was short, low-key, and largely behind closed doors. Trump didn't extend any special warmth. He made demands. Modi responded with more concessions, hoping to reignite the connection, but it didn't land. According to insiders, Trump has privately criticized Modi's approach, calling India too slow, too defensive, and reportedly mocked the Make in India campaign as just branding. Instead of doubling down on the Modi relationship, the administration is now putting more energy into closer coordination with Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, and the Philippines, partners seen as more responsive and disciplined. The change in tone between the two leaders reflects a broader shift. If the top-level chemistry is gone, the rest of the relationship starts to follow. But what comes after August 1st, now that everything hinges on the August 1st deadline? If no agreement is reached, the US will impose a new round of reciprocal tariffs, 25% on key Indian exports like steel, aluminum, auto parts, and chemicals. Indian officials have already begun preparing countermeasures, which could include new duties on US farm goods and industrial equipment. At that point, the tone changes. We move from negotiations to enforcement, from quiet tensions to open economic penalties. India may respond by pursuing deeper deals with the EU, ASEAN, or BRICS. The US, meanwhile, is likely to continue strengthening ties with its other Indo-Pacific partners, and start treating India less like a strategic pillar and more like a separate, sometimes cooperative actor. No one will call it a rupture. There won't be a formal announcement. But in practice, this could mark the moment where the US and India stop drifting apart and start growing apart. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe for more content.